Hi, I'm Liz Homer. I'm the curator of the Turner Dodge House. Tonight we're hosting the Meet Your City program, a program we host each first Monday of the month at 7 p.m. Tonight's speaker is Jerry Lawler, who is the head of the Michigan Capital Commission. He's a member of the Greater Lansing Historical Society and also a member of the Friends of Turner Dodge. And he will be speaking about the history of the Grand River. We hope that you'll enjoy this evening's talk and that you'll come to our meetings in the future at the Turner Dodge House and have an opportunity to follow the program with a tour of the house.
Okay, well, thanks for inviting me here. One, we're going to look at the Grand River. I became interested in the Grand River because I'm really curious how people got into this area. And the Grand River obviously played a major role in that. I started out looking at the Grand River Road and find out that was really much later. There's several Grand River roads, and it was really the river that played a major role. You've got a handout, which I'll refer to point to point. The front page is basically the first highway system of the lower part of the state. The Little P's main portages there, but basically the river system was used as means of transportation. And then there's a list of the traders and where they located and approximate dates. And then back to the Grand River with the political boundaries inserted on top of it. The Indian name for the Grand River was dependent on who you want to listen to as a source. It was Washchinong, Washchinug, Owashchinong, or some variation of that. And basically it says the settlers come in, the explorers, they wrote it down, the Indian version, and it got misspelled. What it means is also take your pick. It supposedly means the beautiful. Another source say far waters, far away water, far off, the further district, further country, extending far inland, long flowing river. So take your pick, is what the Native Americans called it. Obviously the first users of the river were the Native Americans, and where they had their villages, farms, camps, and when I say villages, I don't mean something there was permanent. They were basically nomadic. They may have been there through a few months of the year, and then they moved on, would come back. But basically, they had a location at Jackson, Onondaga, on the Red Cedar, at Okemos, Williamston. Very little in Lansing. There are several sources saying there were one or two families here, but Lansing, Ingham County was never a big Native American settlement area. Portland, Lionsmere, there was extensive fields there. Danby and Ionia County, there were extensive settlement there. Lowell, Ada, Grand Rapids, there were two villages there. Granville, Crockery Point, Battle Point, and finally Grand Haven. And it's rather amazing that these same sites is where the settlers settled and towns were built. But you stop and think about it, the Native Americans had cleared the area either naturally or with labor and had their fields. So when the settlers came, it gave them a heads up. Okemos was purchased for that reason. The first wheat field planted in Williamston by settlers was a Native American site, was a Native American field. So basically they got a heads up start on it. The early history in the 1600s, basically we had missionaries and explorers and fur traders. Fur traders were coming in. They would come down, collect furs, and go back either to Mackinac or someplace. They did not have establishments in the area. The earliest recorded, and this was recorded as an account of Territorial Governor Cass, said that missionaries came across Michigan, mainly by the Grand River, in 1632. And that would be the earliest account that I'm aware of anybody using the Grand River other than Native Americans. LaSalle came along 50 years later and supposedly used the Grand River as he was exploring to get back to Detroit. By the 1680s into the early 1700s, lots of the maps of the Grand River. And I collected some of them. They're in a little notebook over here if you want to stop in afterward and look at them. Some of them are extraordinarily accurate if you look at them. Some are way off base, but a lot of them they had the system down, they had the portages down. And in the French versions, it was called Le Grand. In the English, it was the Great River. So depending on which map you had, it was either the Great or the Grand River, and the Grand stuck. In 1785, supposedly the last major Native American battle was fought along the Grand. And that was up around Lyons in Ionia County. And the Potawatomis held the area, and some Chippewas won it. Supposedly that was the last battle along the Grand River. In 1790, we have the first description of Lansing, the first written description of what would become Lansing. There's a guy by the name of Hugh Howard, and he was a British fur trader. And he has an account just in the Askin papers, and basically talks about coming down the Red Cedar, goes into the Grand. There were 2 families of Native Americans here from the Saginaw tribe. And then he talks about going through the high banks, which is believed to be North Lansing, describing the banks of North Lansing. So the first recorded description of what supposedly became Lansing. In the 1800s, as you see in your handout, that's basically when the traders started to come in and started to actually establish trading posts along the Grand River. And you see that they started at Grand Haven and basically worked upriver. And primarily by the 1820s, they were pretty well established. There were a few in the early 30s, but basically in the 1820s is when the traders basically established trading posts along the river. In 1812, we go back a little bit about history. Of course, Michigan was captured by the British in the War of 1812. Hull surrendered Detroit. The federal government, which basically played a role in settlement of this area, adopted a policy that if they were going to defend which was the Michigan territory, they had to get settlers out here. So they had a policy of giving the soldiers who fought in the War of 1812 bounty land. And they're going to put them out here with the idea they'd come out, settle it, bring their families, clear the established cities. They had a population here to defend the border. They sent a surveyor team out to start surveying and blocking off the land. They ended up around Detroit in the spring, and they wrote the famous Tiffin report back that there wasn't 1 acre in 1,000 in Michigan that was worth a damn. The thumb would never be developed. It was totally worthless. So Michigan sort of limped along. Settlers are pouring in to Illinois, Ohio, and Indiana. It's hard to get to Michigan because you have the Black Swamp, what they call around Toledo. You got to come around that way and up, or else go through Canada. So Michigan sort of limped along, and it wasn't until the Erie Canal was opened in 1825 and settlers had an easy path in that settlers could get into Michigan. So once that canal was open, people could jump, come down the canal on Buffalo to Buffalo, jump on a steamer, come across to Detroit, and population started coming into Michigan. During that time, basically in 1819, they are acquiring the land from the Indians. Land east of Meridian Line, out here in Meridian Township, Meridian Road, was acquired in 1819 by the Treaty of Saginaw. We distinguished the Native American claims. In 1825, same year the Erie Canal is open, Lucius Lyon is surveying the lines of Lansing Township. 2 years later, Musgrove Evans came in and laid out the interior lines. And he, as told you this before, he's a rather interesting character. When you go down Saginaw or any of the mile streets that he laid out, his son fought in the Alamo, died in the Alamo. And once the son died, Daddy leaves Michigan, goes to Texas, joins the Army, goes into Mexico to teach Santa Ana a lesson. And his surveyor instruments right now are on display over in the State Library or the State Museum in a temporary display. I don't know whether he used them here. There's only a temporary display, and I think it opened last week, but his surveying instruments are over there. So basically, we're laying out, we're surveying the land. The lines are run. 1829, Ingham County is laid out named. It's not organized, it's just laid out. But in that same year, enough population has come in that we have Jackson, what became Jackson is founded, Kalamazoo is founded, coming across. In 1829, we also have the first account of anybody coming up along the Grand River. And that was a gentleman started in Jackson and was trying to follow an Indian trail up the east and north side of the Grand River. And he got lost someplace shy of what's now Grand Rapids. Native Americans basically found him, took him to one of their camps, nursed him back to health, and he basically said he had enough of Michigan and took off and left and never came back. That was enough. And in 1830, the land east of Meridian Road was opened up for sale. For the first time, settlers could buy that land. 1833 is sort of the keystone year when settlers came in. And amazingly, it started flooding into the area, and that's when the first settlers were in Eaton Rapids, Lyons, DeWitt. Captain Scott came into DeWitt. Ionia, the Dexter party came around the North Grand River Road, cut Dexter Road up to Ionia. Portland, the first settlers. Grand Rapids, the first settlers. Granville, the first settlers. Grand Haven, the first settlers. So 1833 is sort of a keystone year as far as opening up the Grand River Basin for settlement. What happened? I'll read you two quick extracts from letters that were both written in 1833. And one was by a settler in Ionia, and he's writing back east, and he says, I have only time to say a few words, and particularly about the Grand River. The springs and streams of water are of first quality. Land may be selected with heavy timber, or little timber, or no timber. He bought all three kinds of land. I was never in a country which I think offers greater advantages for a poor man to settle than this. It is far superior to my anticipations. In another letter written at the same time from Luther Lincoln back east, where I am here is prairie, good timberland, good opening, good open land, good pine, some good grass. I bought 2 pieces of meadow, the best I ever saw. So the Tiffin Report's getting turned around by the people's first settlers that are here writing letters back east saying, come. In 1840, the Michigan Gazetters noting the Grand River country includes some of the richest and most valuable lands in the state. These lands are now in demand by immigrants from the east who are fast increasing in population and improvements and raising flourishing villages. I'm not going to get into a litany, but basically in the early 30s, you have the grist mills coming into Ionia. There's a ferry operating at Ionia across the Grand River, ferrying settlers back and forth. Regular shipments of lumber are at this point going out of Grand Haven. Lowell settled. The land office is opened in Ionia. Lyons is platted. Steamboat traffic is now starting to operate out of Grand Rapids. DeWitt is platted. So basically things are basically booming. As far as this area, which we're in right now, in 1835 to 1837 is when Bushnell, Seymour, the Fords, Townsends buy land in this area. In 1836, the Fords basically, for the Red Cedar and Grand, meet south of that, plat out, and start trying to settle Vital City. Bushnell, and I assume Seymour, but I can't prove it, I definitely know Bushnell, hired a guy, Alcott. He was one of the landlookers for them. They send him up here from Marshall, and he starts to build the Alcott Hotel, some place up here on Grand River, basically what's called Franklin Street. Someplace along the river, nobody's quite positive where that was. But as he's getting building, he brought the supplies up from Marshall by horseback, supposedly along the river, and then he gets pulled off. They pull the plug on him, and the place eventually supposedly burns. But a little creek was named Alcott Creek that came in, which we'll talk about later. So the hotel was probably located pretty close to Alcott Creek. What is going on in the same period of time nationally is we're going into a major depression. And that's how come things are slowing down. We had the species circular where they no longer, due to land speculation, could buy land in credit. They had to pay cash. There was a major drought. So things are getting tough. People then, big boys are pulling back a little bit. In 1837, Seymour hires Cyrus Hewitt, who would later be a mayor of Lansing, to come in and survey a site for him for dam up here in the north end. Seymour acquires Bushnell's interest in 1839. And also in 1837, the same time period, we have basically the first resident of the area, and that's the Cooley, Jacob Cooley, and he uses the river to get in here. And also in the fall, he goes back. In November, he goes back to Jackson to bring up supplies. He basically cut a tree off, left the stump, or left the trunk on the stump, put brush up off the side of it, covered it with dirt, and that's what he was going to live in during the winter. So he goes back to Jackson and to get his winter supplies, flour, salt, whatever. He's coming up the Grand River in a rough boat in November. Gets up to about Diamondale. His boat breaks up on him. He tries to pull out as much flour and salt out of the river as he can, gets on shore, and again, the pattern we see time and time again is some Native Americans come along and basically save his rear end. They take him back, rub him, warm him up, and basically provide food for him and stay with him during the winter. The next spring, June, he calls for his wife. At that point, he has got some kind of a rudimentary cabin put up, and he's down here. If I can find him right here. This is basically Waverly Road. He isn't on the Grand River, he's down below it. That's where he's coming from. Calls for his wife and 2 children come. They get to Detroit. They hire a Teamster to take them to Jackson. The sheriff, apparently the Teamster's a rogue. The sheriff comes and gets the Teamster, lets her continue with her rig to Jackson. There they take it away from her, so she starts to walk with her 2 children to Eaton Rapids, gets lost in the woods. Is found by another settler, and they send a Native American to go get Cooley. He comes down and gets them, builds another rough boat, and he brings the family in here on the Grand River. That's how they settled. In 1835, we see a lot of settlers coming down the Grand River. They're going to Jackson, and they're going all the way up to Grand Rapids, Ionia, Portland, and there's account after account after account of it. Usually they're not sending the heavy stuff up the Grand River. They're sending basically the immediate effects, the family. They're sending the heavy stuff, particularly if they're going to Ionia and further west, around on the Great Lakes to Grand Haven, and then bringing it up from Grand Haven up the river the other way. In 1837, the state embarks on a major internal improvement program, which affects this area. And their grand scheme was basically to have a railroad run along the southern tier of counties, then central through the next tier. Through this tier was to run a canal, the Clinton to Kalamazoo Canal. And if you look at your front page there, you can see where the Clinton River comes across, and you can project all the way across that tier of counties. It would connect to the Kalamazoo, so it's a Clinton-Kalamazoo Canal. The canal was to run a little bit north of Mason, across the center of the county. And then the next tier of counties to the north was to be another, the Northern Railroad, with another canal connecting Saginaw to the Grand River. Well, they started on, long story, that isn't the story here, but basically they started building the Central Railroad, started building a lot. They never got the full $5 million. The internal improvements cost a lot more than what they had budgeted for. They got in trouble right away, point blank. But how did it affect this area? Well, they knew they were in trouble, so they started looking at alternatives. And one of the alternatives they looked at, which is sort of an untold story about this area, they looked at running a canal through here. Taking the Clinton Canal, which you could easily get to a little place past the west of Howell, and then they were going to connect it, and if you look at your map, you connect it then into the Grand River system, not the Kalamazoo River system. So they sent a surveyor out in 1838 through this area, and he looked at 3 alternatives. He looked at basically going to Howell and then swinging a canal up around the Red Cedar, the big curve in the Red Cedar. And on the second page in there, you've got a little map of this. And then they would swing it down to the mouth of where the Red Cedar goes into the Grand. And then use the Grand as a canal basically out to Lake Michigan. He rejected this because the Red Cedar was too curved and too shallow in places. Couldn't get a good enough draft. The next thing he looked at is basically running it from that same point, that curve in the Red Cedar basically at the county line, and running it up here to North Lansing and have it connecting to Elcock Creek, which is basically between Saginaw. Some accounts say it's closer to Saginaw than a west and north Grand River. The maps show it almost parallel to North Grand River, coming in there. And he rejected this. And for the simple reason that, one, there was too many marshes directly to the east, and what he was talking about was where the boys' training school is, Catholic Central, Red Cross, now the Groesbeck Golf Course, which were all ponds and swamp at one time, even up to the 50s, I think, with the last pond was drained. And then, if you go down Oakland, he said there was too many ridges, be right at the east bank. If you go down to Oakland, you go past the fire station, you immediately go up to Clark Street, then you take a big dip to Farland, then you take another big rise up to Johnson, and then you slope down. You couldn't put enough locks in there to handle it, so he rejected that. So finally his alternative they looked at and recommended was swinging it up through Pine Lake, which is Lake Lansing, and then connected into the Looking Glass, and then down into the Grand River. But rather interesting to think we could have had a canal running right through the center of town. That canal was still agitated even up to the 1847 and a little later, primarily by interest from Howell, Livingston County. One of the reasons given for locating the capital here is there would be a canal within a few miles. So you could easily get to the new capital of Michigan by coming down the canal. Whatnot. Didn't happen. In the 40s, there is lots of petition, 1840s, need to improve the river. You got to understand the roads were basically non-existent. They were using the river. Austin Blair, who was a resident of Eaton County at the time, sent a big petition in. There's petitions from Ingham County. And basically what they were saying is that about 1/8 of the population is located along the Grand River. Now most of it's located in Jackson. About 60% of it is on Jackson. Kent County, Ingham, all have about 10% each. And they were, how do you open that up? And they're basically saying if we're going to have mills, we've got to improve the Grand River. And there is a state report that agreed with them. And also said that basically Detroit had gotten all the money so far. We see this animosity between Detroit and the rest of the state. Nothing new. Absolutely nothing new. It started with internal improvements. And then the last, and we don't have enough time to read, but in the last of it they're saying, we haven't gotten anything. People of the Grand River Valley haven't gotten anything. It's our turn to get a little juice, from the state, rather than giving it to Detroit. Sort of a veiled threat. Nothing really happened. There was some federal land and some federal money, but it's basically to improve the Grand River from Grand Rapids to Grand Haven. Even as late as Civil War era, 1863, there's a notice in the Eaton County or Charlotte paper saying there's going to be a meeting in J.C. Bailey's banking company office in Lansing for the purpose of organizing a stock company to make improvements to the Grand River. And what they're talking about is the Jackson, this upper part of the river. So if the government wasn't going to do it, we were going to get private enterprise in here to do it. The river was used for transportation, we've seen that. Even in wintertime it was used. Food was really scarce for the early settlers. And there are several accounts. Grand Haven is starving. They sent an expedition basically down to Battle Creek to buy 200 bushels of wheat, 100 hogs, and other supplies. They take them, come down the river to Granville. The river's frozen over, so they put the pigs on the ice. Pigs have no choice but to go to Grand Haven. They can't get off the river because of the banks. So they drive them down, and then when they arrive into Grand Haven, they didn't shoot off cannons, but everybody turned out with a big God bless you for bringing the food in. Ingersolls, when they came out here to Delta Mills the first winter, same thing, no food. Some guy, Butterfield, came down the river in the spring with a canoe full of potatoes. They bought the whole canoe at $2 a bushel. Very expensive at that time, but basically they didn't have any money. 37, Ionia's out. They sent a guy to Jackson on the Grand River to buy 8 barrels of flour. It takes him 8 days to get it back. But again, the same thing. They had to have the food. Dams. If you're going to raise food, you have to, wheat particularly, and that's what the first thing the settlers did. You're going to have grist mills and power to do it. And you had to build dams. In the state, just see what we did for GM to get a couple of plants here. Basically anything GM wants, we're going to give to them. Realistic. They wanted roads, we'll give them roads. They want sewers, we'll give them sewers. Why? If we don't do it, Ohio, somebody else is. The idea that they're going to provide jobs here long-term for decades down the road. We get the property tax, we get the people here that have subsistence to raise their family on. Same policy, nothing new by the state. Only originally in this era, it was dams. It was a state policy, very lenient. And again, there's a committee report that told what their policy was, and they wanted to be very lenient, because anybody who built a dam, a town would flourish around. They were public benefactors that basically supplied jobs. And that was the whole rationale for it. And if we didn't do it, basically they'd be shipping everything out of Michigan down to Ohio or some other state would, and we would be a dependent territory on other states. So what they did is just about anybody who applied got a dam. In Delta Mills in 1836, the Ingersolls applied. They got the mill on the north side. Jerry Ford, one of the founders of Beetle Sidling in 1837, out in Windsor Township, he got approval to build a dam, never built it. 1837, the same year, we had his Seymour sent Hewis DeWitt in here to look at the North Lansing site. Dam was authorized in Portland. Kilbourne out in Meridian Township. Kilbourne Street's named after Seymour's land agent in here. He was authorized to build a dam. Williams were authorized to build a dam in Williamston. Eaton Rapids was authorized to build a dam. On and on and on. A lot of these were never built. Bushnell and Alcott were authorized to build a dam down in section 19, over here by along Waverly Road. And when Lansing, after Seymour Dam, 1848, we immediately had a dam fight in Lansing. We had Seymour's, up here was power. I mean, that was where the power, that's where the energy was. And we had Bush, Lee, and Thomas got permission to either build a dam in section 21 or 22 on the Red Cedar. Nobody, I think what they were looking at was Morris River site, is what they were after. They never built that either. But there immediately we had two interests. They had approval to build it, this never did. What were these dams basically like? And we have a very good description of the North Lansing Dam and how it was built. And basically they sunk butts of trees into the river channel, and they relied on backfill of gravel debris coming down the river to fill it in. And then anything they could find along the shore, gravel, boulders, anything else, they come out and threw into it. And then right after the North Lansing Dam was built, there was a Tower family came down, talked about how they came down there. They were going to Grand Rapids, coming in, started at Jackson, coming down the river. And they spent the night up here in North Lansing, in Richard's cabin. And then he helped them around his dam the next morning. They proceeded on, they described the cabin and all that kind of good stuff. In 1845, they're still trying to draw settlers into this area. And Grand Rapids actually put out a PR piece, a little booklet they were sending east. And they were noticing, how do you get into Grand Rapids, the flourishing capital of the Grand River? Is basically you come down the Grand River. You can take it, either come from Jackson east this way, but they advised you not to send your heavy goods that way. Much cheaper to send them around the lakes and then bring them up by steamer up the Grand, from Grand Haven. You could also take a stagecoach from Battle Creek. That took quite a while, but basically they were still trying to get people in here. We looked at wheat. We talked about dams. Obviously, grist mills, sawmills and grist mills were the first things that were built. That's why they needed the dam, the power from the dam. The first one here, which is pretty typical, was a year after the capital was moved in 1848. Built up here in North Lansing. And they planted wheat, and this area, in the lower three counties of Michigan, became part of the wheat belt of this country, which a lot of people don't realize. And first product, the first thing we were exporting out of here in our economy was wheat. First product, wheat. There were mills, all kinds of mills, most of them in North Lansing. Some of them down, was one almost at Michigan Avenue, the Thome Mill was down there, but most of them were concentrated up in North Lansing, and there were several of them. And at the height, it started as early as 1845, there's shipments of wheat going out of DeWitt, surplus wheat. Now they're starving when they first come in. Very quickly the land supports growing of wheat, and they have a surplus, and they're shipping it out. So the first shipments out of DeWitt are in 1845, but sort of a comparison, in 1836, from going down the Erie Canal, arriving at Buffalo, New York from Michigan, basically 300,000 bushels of wheat. 10 years later, 6.5 million bushels of wheat going out. Lance is one of the untold stories. The symbol of Michigan. It sort of peaked in the 1870s, 1880s. The symbol of agriculture used in the Michigan capital, which was built in the 1870s, is wheat. Michigan has her hand on the symbol of Michigan has her hand on the shock of wheat. Wheat's used in the glass. We had the stave factory in North Lansing. What were they doing? They were producing barrels. Ingham County was shipping about 40,000 barrels a year to England and Scotland. That was our chief destination for it. What happened? Very quickly, Oklahoma, South the Dakotas, Kansas was opened up. And by 1890, Michigan was going right down the tube as far as wheat production. In the 1870s, Michigan was the fourth largest producer of wheat in the country. And the others, the first was Illinois, second Indiana, third Oklahoma, and fifth was Wisconsin after Michigan. And basically by the 1890s, it's all over with, and wheat is no longer a big product. At the same time, Michigan was never a big, or the Grand River Basin was never a big lumber operation, particularly this part of it. The lower part along the flat that feeds in was, as I mentioned before, they started shipping lumber out of Grand Haven in 1836. The first shipments of lumber were going out of Grand Haven. 1843, they started logging the maple. 1845, there's about 15 million board feet going out of the Grand River Basin. And again, it sort of peaks in the 1870s. In Grand Haven in 1875, there's like 88 million board feet going out. The next year, they're down to 59 million, plus basically 29 million feet. And again, by the 1890s, it's logged off. Again, this area around Ingham County, North Lansing, was hardwoods, primarily hardwoods. And that sort of takes us into our next industries, which again also came in here, settled almost all along the Grand River in this area. And we have the chair factory in 1875, Lansing Wagon Works, Lansing Iron and Engine Works, Eureka Fanning Mill, Allen Planing Mill, 1876 Beeman and Sons. Where are they located? All along the river. What are they using? They're using hardwoods in one way or the other, which are right here locally. They're stockpiling them in the Grand River. There were corrals along the Grand River. And at some point, and I don't know where this is, there's a account where they dug out someplace where it's now got to be in the BTS or along that area of the bank. BTS came all the way to the river. As they dug a log holding pond. That they stockpiled logs in there before they could float them down and use them in their industries. So that was the next set of industries in which the Grand River was used for. Also, from day one, the Grand River was used for recreation. This first steamboat into Grand Rapids, 1837. What did they do on the 4th of July? They took it out in the river, had a little cruise. The coolies, first 4th of July, down here, where did they go to celebrate? The Grand River. And their account is they raised a flag with Native Americans on a rock, and basically sang patriotic songs on the Grand River. They didn't live on the Grand River, but they went to the river. But in the late 60s, and again we can use Lansing area, it's when the river really started to be used for recreation. And we had recreation boats, little steamboats. Captain Loomis had a Seabird, Mini Cass, Pickwick, and these were little steamboats that were plying the Grand River right in this area. And they were plying from the dam down to Michigan Avenue Bridge. There was a stop, and then they'd go further downstream. And at the same time, 1870, we have Grand Ledge. We have the Seven Island Resort open up. We have the Mineral Well Hotel opened up here, down where the Red Cedar on Spring Street, where the Grand River and Red Cedar come together. Again, it was baths. It was a recreational facility. Island Park in Eaton Rapids, they had sort of a miniature zoo and other curiosities, but again, it was another destination point on the Grand River, again, recreation. We also had the Lansing Boat Club, formed in 1872, and they had regattas here. Teams were hosted as far away as Toledo, and so the river for the first time is being used for recreation in a big way. But also, unfortunately, it started from day one, sort of accelerated in the 1870s. The river has been used as a sewer, very clearly. When the Capitol was built, they wanted to run a sewer out of it, which would have been the first sewer in Lansing, other than privies and whatnot. We had a big debate. And the good citizen of Lansing on the east side of the river couldn't understand why they should be taxed to pay for a sewer that only served the capital and the people on the west side of the Grand River. People over down by Rudder Park didn't figure out why they should have to pay for it. So it was actually stymied. And finally, the good city fought for it. When the capital first opened up, there was no sewer connected. There was reference to a lagoon on the west side. I assume that lagoon was not a pleasant place to be. And then they immediately got their act together, and they got into a big debate. And basically the city fathers, governor, whatnot met, decided to run the first sewer in the city of Lansing. And the debate was, where should we run it into the Grand River at? And it wasn't what to do with it, it was where we're going to run it in. And basically decided the city wanted to run in below the dam. We're basically up to North Lansing, below the dam. And that's exactly what they did. So they're drawing water in up above it. In fact, we were pumping water to run the capital. Basically, there was a steam pump sitting on the Grand River bank pumping water up Ottawa Street, up to tanks in the 4th floor of the Capitol. So they're pumping it out of it, but we're dumping the sewer in down below. And unfortunately, even up to sort of defining mark 1916, Grand Rapids is still dumping its sewer directly into the Grand River, not treating it. And one of the suburbs, Wyoming, I believe, was a rather landmark Michigan Supreme Court case, basically saying you can't do this any longer. And unfortunately, we're still doing it, even Lansing in limited aspects of heavy rains, using it as a sewer. So basically, what we've seen is basically the Grand River used by the Native Americans. They used it for food. There's accounts of sturgeon in the river, even in this area, even in Lansing. Supposedly there was sturgeon in the river. We have Native Americans using it for food as well as transportation. We have the early settlers using it, clearly a lot of them to get into this area. And further, Portland, Ionia were coming down the river. Now there were other ways in here. It wasn't down what we think of the Grand River Road through Howell, Fowler, that. Basically there was too many swamps and too many hardwoods. The original Grand River sprung up through Byram, Lagensburg, over to DeWitt, around the swamps. The Chandler Swamp, the swamps out east of here. And the other way they were getting in, again, it was a U-shape. They were coming down through Jackson and then up. And that's how they're getting into Grand Rapids, through Kalamazoo. They weren't coming directly at it, they were coming around it to get into it. But the early settlers clearly used it, one for transportation system. They used it for power, for their sawmills, for their grist mills, for recreation. And then it was used for industry. We've seen the wood, and all your industries were located along the river. They were using the water in one way or the other. They had to have it. So it supported the first industries in the state. And lastly, we see what we're basically using it now for the two final purposes, and that is a sewer and recreation. And I think what we do with it is really up to us. I think there's been some great strides coming back. The County Drain Commission, I don't know if anybody has been doing they've actually got a couple task forces going. One, there are some horrendous pictures that they have showing the Red Cedar when it was basically a sewer. I mean, it absolutely, some of the things, there's been some great strides, but even back in the 50s where they're actually totally dead, I mean, it's basically incredible. So we've come a long way, but I think we got a long way to go, and what we do with the Grand River is basically going to be up to us. So